The airport is busy. People rush through the terminal, dragging suitcases behind them. Some are excited. Others look tired. Announcements echo through the speakers, calling passengers to their gates. Daniel walks confidently through the terminal. He is dressed sharply, pressed slacks, a button-up shirt, and polished shoes. He carries a leather bag, his first-class ticket tucked safely in his pocket. As he approaches the gate, he hands his ticket to the agent. She scans it, glances at him briefly, then hands it back. "Enjoy your flight," she says without much emotion. Daniel nods and heads down the jet bridge. Inside the plane, the first-class cabin is calm and spacious. Plush seats, extra legroom, and quiet passengers create a different atmosphere from the crowded economy section. Daniel finds his seat, 2A, by the window. He places his bag in the overhead compartment, then sits down. He exhales, ready to enjoy the flight. A flight attendant moves through the aisle, offering pre-flight drinks. She gives Daniel a quick glance, but doesn't say much. A woman across the aisle watches Daniel. She is in her late 50s, wearing expensive jewelry and designer clothing. Her expression changes as she observes him. Her brows knit together. She frowns slightly, then leans toward the passenger next to her. "Did you see that?" she whispers. The man beside her shrugs. "See what?" She tilts her head toward Daniel. "Him, sitting in first class." The man looks at Daniel, then back at her. "So?" She scoffs. "I just didn't expect that." The man doesn't respond. He shifts uncomfortably in his seat. The woman stares at Daniel for a moment longer, her fingers tapping against the armrest. The flight attendants make their final checks. Passengers fasten their seatbelts. The plane's doors close. As the engines roar to life, Daniel adjusts his seatbelt and glances out the window. He doesn't notice the woman still watching him, her lips pressed into a thin line. The flight is about to begin. The plane starts taxiing to the runway. The gentle hum of the engines fills the cabin. Passengers settle into their seats, some adjusting their pillows, others scrolling through their phones. Daniel leans back, closing his eyes for a moment. He's ready for a peaceful flight. But the woman across the aisle has other plans. She keeps glancing at him, her expression filled with irritation. She exhales loudly, shifting in her seat as if she's uncomfortable. Finally, she presses the call button above her head. A flight attendant arrives a few moments later, a polite smile on her face. "How can I help you, ma'am?" The woman leans in, lowering her voice. "I think there's been a mistake." The flight attendant tilts her head. "A mistake?" The woman nods, then gestures toward Daniel. "Him." Daniel doesn't react at first. He's wearing headphones, listening to soft music. The flight attendant looks confused. "I'm sorry, ma'am." "What do you mean?" The woman sighs as if she has to explain something obvious. "Are you sure he's supposed to be here, in first class?" The flight attendant blinks, caught off guard. "I'm sure he has a valid ticket, ma'am." The woman raises an eyebrow. "Well, did you check?" At this point, Daniel notices the conversation. He removes one of his earbuds, turning to face them. "Is there a problem?" he asks calmly. The woman offers a fake smile. "Oh, I was just making sure everything was in order. You know, these airlines make mistakes sometimes." Daniel narrows his eyes. He knows exactly what's happening. The flight attendant hesitates, then turns to Daniel. "Sir, may I see your ticket?" Daniel exhales slowly. He reaches into his pocket and pulls out the neatly folded boarding pass. He hands it over without a word. The flight attendant scans it, her eyes flicking over the details. She sees the words "First Class, Seat 2A" printed clearly on the paper. She hesitates, then nods. Everything is in order. She hands the ticket back to Daniel, forcing a smile. But the woman isn't done. "Are you sure?" she presses. "I mean, did he actually pay for that seat?" A tense silence fills the air. A few nearby passengers turn their heads, sensing the tension. Daniel clenches his jaw, but stays composed. He looks directly at the woman. "Is there a reason you're questioning me?" The woman shrugs, her tone casual. "No reason, I just didn't expect someone like you in first class." The words hang in the air, heavy and unspoken. Daniel takes a deep breath. He's heard things like this before. It never surprises him. The flight attendant shifts uncomfortably. She clears her throat. "Ma'am, he has a valid ticket." But the woman isn't satisfied. She crosses her arms. "Well, I don't feel comfortable." The flight attendant looks uncertain. She glances at Daniel, then back at the woman. "Would you like me to move him?" she asks hesitantly. Daniel's eyes widen slightly. He can't believe what he just heard. A few passengers murmur quietly, sensing the unfairness. The woman nods, looking satisfied. Yes, I think that would be best. The flight attendant turns to Daniel, her expression apologetic but firm. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to move to economy. Daniel exhales sharply. He grips the armrest tightly, forcing himself to stay calm. He looks at the flight attendant, his voice steady. No. A shocked silence follows. The woman stiffens. The flight attendant blinks in surprise. Daniel keeps his gaze firm. I paid for this seat. I'm not moving. The flight attendant looks unsure of what to do. The woman scoffs, shaking her head. Unbelievable, she mutters. Passengers around them shift, sensing the growing tension. Daniel stays still. He refuses to be pushed around. The flight attendant sighs. Sir, I'll have to call the cabin supervisor. Daniel nods. Go ahead. The flight attendant hesitates for a second, then turns and walks toward the front of the plane. The woman smirks, sitting back in her seat as if she's already won. But Daniel doesn't move an inch. He's not going anywhere. The flight attendant walks quickly toward the front of the plane, her face tense. Passengers whisper among themselves. Some glance at Daniel with sympathy. Others avoid looking at him altogether. Daniel remains calm, but inside, he feels a familiar frustration. He's worked hard for everything he has. He bought his first-class ticket fair and square, and yet, here he is, being questioned simply because someone doesn't think he belongs. The woman smirks, her confidence growing. She leans back in her seat, adjusting her expensive scarf. I don't know why you're making this difficult, she mutters. You could just move and save everyone the trouble. Daniel turns his head slowly. His voice is low but firm. The only person causing trouble is you. The woman gasps, placing a hand over her chest as if she's been personally attacked. Excuse me? Daniel doesn't answer. He's done explaining himself. A few moments later, the flight attendant returns, but she's not alone. A man in a dark blue uniform walks beside her. His presence commands respect. His captain's wings gleam under the cabin lights. The pilot. The moment he steps into the first-class section, the whispers die down. A few passengers straighten in their seats. Even the flight attendant looks nervous. The pilot stops next to Daniel's seat. His expression is calm, but his eyes are sharp. Sir, he says, his voice even. I understand there's a situation here. Daniel nods. Apparently, I don't belong in first class. The pilot's eyes flicker toward the woman across the aisle. She sits up straighter, suddenly less confident. I was just asking a simple question, she says quickly. I didn't mean any harm. The pilot looks at the flight attendant. Did you check his ticket? The flight attendant nods hesitantly. Yes, Captain. It's valid. The pilot raises an eyebrow. Then why was he asked to move? The flight attendant swallows hard. The passenger over here, she gestures toward the woman, expressed concerns. The woman jumps in. I didn't feel comfortable. I just thought there might have been a mistake. That's all. The pilot sighs. His gaze sharpens. Ma'am, let me be very clear. There was no mistake. The woman shifts uncomfortably. The pilot turns back to Daniel. Sir, I sincerely apologize for this inconvenience. You have every right to be here. Daniel nods but doesn't speak. The pilot straightens. His next words are firm and direct. No one has the right to question your seat, your presence, or your worth. Not on my plane. The woman's face turns red. She stammers, trying to find something to say. The flight attendant lowers her gaze, clearly embarrassed. A few passengers nod subtly, approving of the pilot's words. The pilot adjusts his uniform. Now, is there anything else I need to address? Silence. The woman presses her lips together, looking away. The pilot gives a final nod. Good. Then he turns to the flight attendant. I expect my crew to treat all passengers fairly. Understood? She nods quickly. Yes, Captain. Excellent. He turns back to Daniel. Enjoy your flight, sir. Daniel finally speaks. His voice is quiet, but there's power in it. Thank you. The pilot nods once, then walks back toward the cockpit. The tension in the cabin lingers, but the power dynamic has shifted. The woman crosses her arms tightly, staring out the window, fuming. The flight attendant clears her throat. Would you like a drink, sir? She asks Daniel, her voice softer than before. He considers it for a moment. Then with a small smile, he nods. Yes, that would be nice. The cabin is silent. The tension still lingers, but the power dynamic has shifted. The woman, who moments ago looked smug, now sits stiffly in her seat. Her arms are crossed, her face is red with embarrassment. Daniel stays calm, but inside he feels a sense of relief. He didn't have to raise his voice, he didn't have to argue. The pilot handled everything with professionalism and authority. The flight attendant, who had asked him to move, now seems unsure of herself. She clears her throat and shifts awkwardly. Passengers around them whisper quietly. Some exchange glances. A few look at Daniel with subtle nods of respect. But the woman isn't done yet. She exhales sharply, flipping through a magazine she isn't really reading. After a moment, she slams it down onto her tray table. "This is ridiculous," she mutters under her breath. Daniel hears her, but he doesn't respond. She turns slightly toward him. "I don't know why you had to make such a big deal out of it," she says. "You could have just moved." Daniel looks at the woman, his tone calm but firm. "I paid for this seat, just like you did." She scoffs, claiming she was just trying to avoid a mistake. Daniel questions why she assumed there was one, and she stays silent. A young man behind them speaks up, apologizing for what happened. An older man agrees, and murmurs of support spread. The woman tenses, realizing people are turning against her. She tries to brush it off, but the young man insists, "Yeah, you did." Annoyed, she says she doesn't need to be attacked and looks away. Daniel puts his earbuds back in and declares, "I'm done with this conversation." She's silent now. The flight attendant returns with a drink, softer and more respectful, apologizing for earlier. Daniel acknowledges her apology and leans back, finally feeling comfortable, though the tension in the cabin lingers. The woman sits stiffly, her hands clenched in frustration. She knows she's lost, but her pride won't let her admit it. Passengers whisper, some admiring Daniel's composure, while others shake their heads at her behavior. She presses the flight attendant call button again, asking to move. When told no seats are available, she demands a different section. The pilot steps in, offering her a seat in economy. She protests, claiming she paid for first class, but the pilot calmly points out that Daniel did too. Silence fills the cabin. The woman, defeated, gathers her things and walks to economy. As the curtain closes behind her, tension fades. A few passengers exchange looks, and then a slow clap begins. The young man from earlier starts a slow, deliberate clap, soon joined by others. The applause builds, surprising Daniel. The pilot nods at him as the cabin settles into a peaceful silence. Daniel finally relaxes, feeling at ease for the first time since boarding. The flight attendant returns, her demeanor softer, and apologizes again. Daniel nods, accepting her apology. The young man, still in disbelief, comments on the incident, and Daniel responds, "Because they think they can." As the meal service begins, Daniel reflects on how the woman, now in economy, might feel, humiliated, but perhaps wiser. He hopes this moment will make her reconsider her behavior next time. An older man nearby praises Daniel for maintaining his dignity throughout the ordeal, adding that sometimes, the best way to win is without a scene. Daniel takes this to heart, feeling a quiet sense of victory. The world hasn't changed, but in this moment, something shifted. For now, that's enough.